Criticism of democracy in the Republic of Plato. Plato's Republic is a discourse of politics and philosophy through imaginary conversations of Socrates, Plato's teacher, and his friends. Firstly, Socrates delves into some contemporary views of justice. He first criticizes vague reciprocity of the Greek saying helping friends and harming enemies, pointing out how both friend and foe can deceive who they really are, and therefore justice cannot be properly enforced, emphasizing that justice requires proper context and plainness. He then spends a considerable amount of time rejecting Thrasymachus's claim that the might of the ruling is right and their injustice pays. This discussion lays the groundwork for Plato's definition of justice, which is quintessential for his perfect state. Socrates argues that like a sharp knife that cuts well and a skilled craftsman are both good at performing their function and are thus good, so are the rulers that rule well good and therefore just and right. Also, only a just life can be happy, since true happiness comes from attaining true knowledge. There will be more explained on this later. Essentially, justice is defined as fulfilling a given role within a well-meaning context. Now, this good-meaning context is something that, on the individual level, is uncovering the true meaning of things, what Plato calls forms. Plato separates the perception of reality into two sections, the intelligible world and the sensible world. The sensible world consists of the lowest form of perception, which is images, essentially all that is fictional and mere imitation of what we can perceive. This would, for instance, be a picture of a bed. The next level is the visible, all that we directly observe through our senses. This would then be an actual bed. The intelligible world, on the contrary to the faulty perception of the senses and its imitations, is the perfect truth and consists of two stages. The thinking stage, which is definitions, our understanding of what something is, and practical logic like mathematics. The final and the highest form is the true and perfect existence of an object. As an example, the famous allegory of the cave is given, where prisoners are kept in a cave and are shown shadows of real objects and perceive them as real. But when one of them is released into the outside, he cannot believe what he is seeing, and when he returns to the others to explain what he's seen, they don't believe him and even ridicule him. This story does not just illustrate that there is a higher meaning beyond our senses, but also to show how an uncultivated mind cannot adequately begin to understand higher forms. So on the social level, Plato's ideal state applies justice in a form of castes, where each individual falls within a caste according to his abilities. There are three classes in this society allegorized by metals: the gold philosophers rule, the silver sentinels protect, and the copper workers work. The enlightened philosopher kings entirely dedicate themselves to ruling and understanding higher forms, which then enables them to guide others to performing good. The sentinels are like the executive branch. They maintain internal order and protect the republic from external threats. Members of this caste grow up with a careful education and are the caste from where future rulers are picked from. And finally, you have the rest of the population, the artisans, farmers, and traders, who produce, build, and trade. Socrates then draws comparison to other political systems, which are also comparable to three classes of a republic, which themselves can be compared to the three main virtues of the individual. The highest form of government would be the philosopher kings, who represent the rational, followed by the first unjust regime, which would be democracy, led by noblemen and represent pride and courage. If these noblemen were to be corrupted by the material, the government would degenerate into an oligarchy, where the wealthy elites rule, and the final stage would be democracy, where the lower classes finally revolt and demand redistribution of political power. According to Plato, democracy leads to government and moral anarchy. From the chaos of democracy, a tyranny eventually springs up, which is the unjust totalitarianism of a minority. The democratic man, to Plato, is a man only capable of living in the present. Materialistic and directionless, tyranny comes almost as salvation to him. He gave the example of the ship crew, and asked if it is fair for the crew to decide who leads the ship. It is obvious that only the trained and educated captain should drive the boat, not the most charismatic sailor. So why do we then give the power to decide to the uneducated masses and allow demagogues to sway elections? Like any other profession, leading is something to be taught, and voting only for those who are educated and can. Plato's critique of democracy stands to this day, maybe even more so with modern democracy. Athenian democracy consisted only of adult male citizens, which was less than 40% of the population of the country. Citizenship for Greek was a cherished privilege and an honor, and Athenians saw participating in politics as a civic duty. Today, citizenship, on the other hand, is seen as a natural right, something taken completely for granted. Voting is often seen as an inconvenience, and is not uncommon to see voter turnout to be less than 50% of the voting citizenship. How can, in a democracy, a vote pass where there wasn't even a majority of the population voting, let alone voting in favor of a certain proposition? And a lot of those who vote in the first place do not vote based on some well thought out decision, but rather a partisan choice that wasn't given much critical thought, or even worse, an almost random pick based on popular opinion. How is this ruling of the people if the people cannot even be bothered to rule? And when a populist movement does get the masses to vote, it is criticized as some threat to democracy. How exactly? Demagogues are the kings of democracy, and populism is its most effective tool. So, what's the solution? Of course, in a perfect world with perfect people, the democracy could work as intended. You could even get rid of the middleman and have direct democracy where all citizens actively participate in government. But that's not the reality we exist in. Plato's state might offer a good theoretical substitute, but it is not without its flaws. It is based on indoctrination, a forced caste system, and the disintegration of the family. The Republic has also been blamed for laying the groundwork for authoritarian regimes of the 20th century, whose ideal state promised paradise, but reality often brought misery and bloodshed, all justified as mere means to an end. Direct application of the Republic into a political system doesn't really seem to work. That's probably because it wasn't meant to be taken as a guide, but more of a thought experiment. Not a government we observe functioning in practice, but rather a theoretical basis that tries to come as close as possible to the ideal state, the ideal Plato's form of a state.